Apex Risk Management, Field Report. If a glowing green stock ticker suddenly burns itself into your basement floor, don't check the Wall Street Journal. Check your pulse. Because if your biological net worth spikes by 400%, the corporate brokers are already on their way to your house with the meat coolers. The darknet algorithm just turned human lives into highly volatile tech stocks. Welcome back to Subbasement 4. Subscribe before your contract is liquidated.
Prologue: Black Market Anatomy. The interior of a Chevrolet Malibu smelled like a veterinary clinic that had been hit by lightning. Mark Vance drove with his left hand, his thumb hooked loosely over the bottom of the steering wheel. His right arm was propped on the door armrest, wrapped from the wrist to the elbow in stiff white gauze that was already turning a greasy yellow from the antibiotic salve beneath. Every time the car hit a pothole on Interstate 95 South, a sharp, white-hot spike of nerve pain shot up to his collarbone, but his face remained as flat and unreadable as a concrete barrier. In the passenger seat, Arthur Pendelton was using a pair of rusty nail clippers to trim the frayed, melted edges of his remaining CVS foam slipper. His yellow mobile rain ponchos were piled on the back seat, leaving him in his damp, wrinkled gray suit. He looked smaller now, his shoulders hunched, his legal pad resting on his knees like an unwanted child. "An eye is worth $85,000, Arthur," Mark said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp against the hum of the tires on the wet highway. "That's the standard structural payout under total optical loss under an Apex commercial policy. A thumb is $45. A foot, if severed below the ankle by a piece of industrial machinery without a safety guard, is $62,500. The company has a book. Every joint, every valve, every square inch of human skin has a fixed, non-negotiable actuarial value." Arthur didn't look up from his slipper. Snip, snip. "And on the open market? On the darknet, through an unverified liquidity pool?" Mark let out a dry, hacking bark that might have been a laugh. "A healthy, unscarred liver from a donor under 30 with an O-negative blood type can fetch $250,000 before sunrise if the buyer's desperate enough. A matching pair of lungs is worth even more if they haven't been exposed to urban smog. The problem isn't the supply, Arthur, it's the logistics. Transporting wet meat requires refrigeration, security, and a very specific type of paperwork. Usually, the brokers have to wait for someone to die in a motorcycle accident." "And if they don't want to wait?" Arthur whispered, the clippers freezing in his hand. "Then you get a margin call," Mark said. The Chevrolet Malibu's dashboard speaker cracked open with a sharp electronic hiss. Judy Lynn's voice cut through the silence, accompanied by the distinct rhythmic clack, clack, clack of her taking a long drag from a cigarette back in Subbasement 4. "Vance," Judy said, her tone devoid of its usual bureaucratic boredom, "the Providence situation just crossed the threshold into a terminal liability. The property owner is an 82-year-old retired machinist named Arthur Vance, no relation to you, Mark. 3 days ago, a line of glowing green text started burning its way through the poured concrete floor of his cellar. It looks exactly like an automated stock ticker from the trading floor in Manhattan." "Did he try to scrape it off?" Mark asked, squinting through the rain at the green exit signs for Cranston, Rhode Island. "He tried a wire brush and 3 gallons of industrial muriatic acid," Judy replied. "The acid didn't touch it. The text isn't painted on the concrete, Mark. It's radiating from inside the aggregate. The local grid data shows a ghost network. An encrypted peer-to-peer darknet node is using the physical foundation of the house as a localized server. It's a live trading desk for an offshore organ harvesting syndicate called the Liquidity Group." Mark's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. "Give me the listings, Judy." "The ticker is tracking the biological vitals of every resident on Elmwood Avenue," Judy said, the sound of her mouse clicking echoing in the dark cabin. "It monitors blood pressure, arterial elasticity, and kidney function via hijacked smart home devices and medical databases. It formats them as tradable stock options. 10 minutes ago, the valuation for a 24-year-old resident named Leo Carter, living directly across the street from the machinist, shot up by 412%. Apex Security Memorandum, case number 10004. Property, 412 Elmwood Avenue, Providence, RI. Anomaly, high-frequency biological asset ticker, concrete substrate. Market status, critical short squeeze detected. An anonymous institutional buyer has placed a bulk buy order for a matching set of pulmonary and renal assets currently housed in resident Leo Carter, age 24, type O negative. Per the automated bylaws of the liquidity group, an automated collection team has been dispatched to liquidate the asset and secure the physical inventory. Total time to asset extraction, 45 minutes. Intercept and protect the collateral. If the resident is disassembled before the audit is complete, the regional insurance pool will default. Why did the kid's price jump? Mark asked, his voice dropping into a hard professional register as he took the exit ramp off the highway. Because a billionaire in Geneva just went into acute liver failure, and Leo Carter is the only perfect matching phenotype currently registered on the eastern seaboard. The syndicate's automated algorithms don't care about municipal law, Mark. To them, Leo Carter isn't a citizen. He's a highly volatile tech stock that's about to hit its peak valuation. They've already dispatched 3 unmarked tactical transport vans from a warehouse near the docks. They're going to harvest him, Pendelton choked out, his legal pod slipping off his knees and hitting the floorboards with a dull thud. No, Arthur, Mark said, as the Malibu's headlights illuminated the row of dark, 3-story Victorian houses of Elmwood Avenue. In the eyes of the market, it's not murder, it's a forced asset liquidation, and the liquidators brought their own coolers. The Malibu rolled to a stop at the curb. The street was dead silent, the heavy summer rain washing over the pavement. But as Mark killed the engine, he could see a faint, toxic green light pulsing from the small, rectangular cellar windows of the house at number 412, casting long, vibrating shadows of the basement beams across the white grass. Mark reached into the glove box with his left hand, pulling out a short, heavy-barreled .38 revolver and dropping it onto Pendelton's lap. "Put the clippers away, Arthur," Mark said, his eyes fixed on 3 pairs of distant, dark headlights that had just turned onto the far end of the street, moving slowly without their running lights. "The market is opening, and we're about to take a short position." The cellar stairs of 412 Elmwood Avenue didn't creak, they groaned under the weight of Mark's boots like dry ribs snapping. The air down here was a suffocating mix of ancient, damp New England soil, 40 years of leaked heating oil, and the choking chemical sting of the 3 gallons of muriatic acid the old man had dumped onto the floor. It did nothing to hide the smell of raw copper and ozone. Arthur Vance, the 82-year-old retired machinist, stood at the base of the stairs, clutching a rusted Craftsman monkey wrench with both hands. His knuckles were white, and his breathing sounded like a wet bellows. "It ain't drawing power from my panel," the old man rasped as his eyes bloodshot as he pointed the wrench at the center of the dark cellar. "I pulled the main breaker 20 minutes ago. The whole house is dead, but that damn thing is getting hotter." Mark Vance stepped off the lost riser, his heavy flashlight beam cutting through the damp gloom. In the center of the poured concrete floor, the supernatural didn't manifest as a ghost or a floating mist. It manifested as a flawless, razor-sharp line of digital text, glowing with the toxic, radioactive green luminescence. It was buried 3 inches deep inside the aggregate, pulsing with a rapid, high-frequency vibration that made the dust on the floor dance in rhythmic, geometric patterns. It looked exactly like an automated stock ticker, scrolling from right to left at an unnatural, dizzying speed. Liquidity Group, Elmwood Avenue Active Board. 402 Elmwood, Reynolds, M., age 67, coronary artery, $12,500, stable. 408 Elmwood, Dupree, Lyd, age 41, hepatic lobe, 34,000, down 2%, alcohol. 415 Elmwood, Carter, Lyd, age 24, total pulmonary integration, 495,000, up 412%, squeeze active. 415 Elmwood, Carter, Lyd, age 24, renal pair, O-neg, 180,000, up 380%, high demand. "Look at the numbers, Mark," Pendelton whispered, his voice cracking as he leaned against a rotting wooden support post, his bare foot lifting off the freezing concrete. "They aren't just scrolling, they're breathing." He was right. Every time the numbers for Leo Carter at number 415 flashed, the green light flared, casting long vibrating shadows at the floor joists across the basement walls. The concrete immediately surrounding the text was dry, turning a chalky, brittle white from the intense, localized heat radiating from the text. "The algorithm isn't just monitoring them," Mark said, his voice dropping into that flat, icy actuary register. "It's pricing them for immediate liquidation. The buyer in Switzerland just cleared the escrow account. The transaction is verified." "What does that mean?" the old machinist chattered, the monkey wrench shaking in his grip. "It means the short squeeze is over, Mr. Vance," Mark said, standing up and checking the cylinder of his short-barreled 3.8 revolver with a practiced metallic click. "Arthur, get your pad and follow me. We have exactly 2 minutes to cross the street before the brokers start collecting their margins." They burst out of the cellar's bulkhead door into the blinding cold Rhode Island rain. Across Elmwood Avenue at number 415, the lights were on in the second-floor window. A shadow moved past the glass. Leo Carter, a 24-year-old kid who probably thought his biggest problem tonight was paying his internet bill, entirely unaware that his blood type and tissue elasticity had just made him the most valuable commodity in New England. At the far end of the block, the 3 dark headlights Mark had seen earlier finally cut their beams. 3 identical matte block Ford Transit vans slipped into the curb outside Leo's house, their engines idling with a low diesel rattle that was completely swallowed by the sound of the rain. The side doors didn't slide open smoothly, they popped with a heavy, synchronized, pneumatic hiss. Out of the van stepped 6 men. They didn't look like street thugs, and they didn't look like monsters. They wore heavy, clear plastic surgical rain slickers over dark tactical clothing. Their faces were covered by high-filtration black respirators that muffled their breathing into a rhythmic, mechanical hiss. 2 of them carried short, suppressed submachine guns. The other 4 carried heavy-duty, insulated stainless steel cooler boxes and specialized hydraulic door-breaching tools. "Mark!" Pendelton whimpered, locking his arms around his legal pad as they crouched behind the Malibu's rusted fender. "They have military gear. Those are medical transport units. They're going to do it right there on the floor." "They're professionals, Arthur," Mark muttered, his left hand gripping the wet butt of his revolver as he watched the lead liquidator raise a heavy hydraulic ram toward Leo Carter's front door. "Arthur," Mark said, his jaw tightening as the rain washed the sweat from his forehead, "hold the gun. If anyone in a plastic coat tries to touch the car, shoot them in the throat. I'm going to go renegotiate the terms of the lease." Chapter 2. Margin Call. Mark Vance didn't run across Elmwood Avenue. Running made noise, and noise was a luxury for people who weren't carrying 40 square inches of third-degree electrical burns under their sleeve. He slipped through the gray sheets of rain like a shadow between 2 headstones, his heavy tactical boots silent on the wet asphalt. He bypassed the front porch entirely. The front porch was where the hydraulic ram was about to meet 4 inches of cheap New England pine. Instead, Mark vaulted the low chain-link fence into Leo Carter's backyard, stepped over a rusted charcoal grill, and drove the heel of his boot directly into the rusty brass latch of the kitchen door. The wood splintered with a dull, wet thwack. Mark was inside. The kitchen smelled of burnt toast and cheap vape juice. In the living room, the blue glare of a television screen illuminated Leo Carter. He was 24, wearing gray sweatpants, sitting on a sagging futon with a plastic bowl of cereal on his lap, completely deaf to the world behind a pair of oversized gaming headphones. Mark didn't explain the situation. He didn't file an introductory claim. He strode into the living room, grabbed the plastic headband of Leo's headphones, and yanked them backwards so hard the plastic snapped. Leo let out a choked yelp, his cereal bowl flipping off his lap and splashing milk across the carpet. "Hey, what the hell?" Leo scrambled backward on the futon, his eyes widening in pure terror as he stared at Mark's wet leather jacket, his bandaged, smoking right arm, and the heavy iron crowbar held in his left hand. "Leo Carter," Mark said, his voice as flat as an autopsy table. "Your liver is currently trading for a 400% premium on the Zurich Dark Exchange. Your front door is about to become public domain. Get behind the kitchen counter." Before Leo could process the sentence, the front of the house exploded. SFX, a heavy metallic thoom that shook the floorboards, followed by the sharp, crystalline shrapnel shatter of the deadbolt housing tearing out of the doorframe. The front door didn't just swing open, it was punched off its hinges, skidding across the hardwood floor. Through the opening, the cold rain misted into the hallway, followed immediately by 3 men in clear plastic surgical slickers. They moved with a terrifying, rhythmic syncopation. No shouting, no demands. The first 2 men stepped through the breach, their short, suppressed submachine guns raised to shoulder level, their black respirator masks letting out a synchronized mechanical hiss, click, hiss, click. The third man carried a long stainless steel cylinder with a pressurized hose, an industrial-grade anesthetic delivery system. "Mark!" Pendleton's voice shrieked through the earpiece from across the street, high, thin, and vibrating with panic. "They're inside, Mark. I can see them through the window. They're not shooting to kill. They're aiming low. They have dart launchers." "Get down," Mark roared, his left hand grabbing Leo by the collar of his hoodie and violently throwing him over the back of the heavy oak-framed futon just as a 3-round burst of subsonic ammunition tore through the drywall where the kid's head had been a millisecond before. The bullets didn't make a loud report, just a series of sharp pneumatic pff, pff, pff sounds, followed by the dry thwack of lead burying itself in the kitchen cabinets behind them. Tech log, real-time value adjustment, spitting out of Mark's cracked smartphone on the floor. Alert, asset integrity report. Target, Carter/L, system monitoring active. Heart rate, 165 BPM, critical hypertension. Adrenaline flood, plus 310%. Market effect, transplant viability dropping 1.2% per minute due to tissue toxicity. "Vance," Judy's voice barked through the static-choked receiver, the sound of her frantic typing sounding like a machine gun in sub-basement 4. The Swiss buyer just saw Leo's vitals spike on the basement ticker across the street. The adrenaline is constricting his hepatic arteries. If his liver stays hypoxic for more than 10 minutes, the contract automatically invalidates. The liquidators are going to move fast to tranquilize him before the asset self-destructs from pure panic. "They're going to have to write off the depreciation, Judy," Mark growled. He rose from behind the futon just as the first liquidator stepped into the living room, the nozzle of the chemical sprayer raised. Mark didn't use a gun. His right hand was too blistered to pull a trigger. Instead, he swung the 16-inch iron crowbar with his left arm in a brutal horizontal arc. The hooked edge of the iron bar caught the liquidator directly across the side of his black respirator mask with a sickening crunch. The plastic mask shattered, spraying blood and broken charcoal filter elements into the air. The man didn't scream. His vocal cords were instantly paralyzed by the backflow of his own chemical spray, but his body folded like a broken deck chair, crashing heavily onto the coffee table. The second liquidator didn't hesitate or look at his fallen partner. He adjusted his stance, his suppressed weapon tracking toward Mark's chest. But before his finger could squeeze the trigger, a loud, deafening bang erupted from the front yard, followed by the sound of a heavy lead slug smashing through the living room window glass and tearing a 4-inch hole through the plaster ceiling. Across the street, Arthur Pendelton was standing behind the rusted fender of the Chevy Malibu, holding the short-barreled .38 revolver with both hands, his eyes completely closed, his body shaking violently as he pulled the trigger a second time, sending another blind bullet through the rainy night air. It wasn't a tactical hit, but it was enough. The second liquidator flinched, his eyes tracking to the window for a fraction of a second. "Leo," Mark hissed, grabbing the terrified 24-year-old by his sweatpants and dragging him toward the narrow wooden stairs that led to the second-floor bedrooms. "Up, now. If you value your kidneys, you'd better start climbing like the renters do." Chapter 3. Hostile Takeover. The second floor of 415 Elmwood Avenue was a narrow, low-ceilinged choke point that smelled of damp wallpaper, old carpets, and the faint, sweet musk of dust that hadn't been disturbed since the Carter family bought the place in the late 90s. Mark Vance threw his weight against a heavy 6-foot oak wardrobe in the hallway, his left shoulder grinding into the dark wood. With a splintering screech, the wardrobe tilted sideways across the top of the stairs, its doors flying open to dump a cascade of old winter coats and tangled wire hangers into a makeshift barricade. "In the room, Leo, move!" Mark barked, his breath whistling through his teeth. His right arm was a dead weight hanging at his side, the heat from his fresh electrical burns radiating through the stiff gauze like a hot brick. Leo didn't run. He fell. He scrambled on his hands and knees into the small rear bedroom, his face completely pale, his lips blue from a sudden drop in blood pressure. He curled up under a laminate computer desk, his arms wrapped over his head as the house below them shook with the sound of another door being kicked off its track. From outside, Pendleton's revolver went click, click, click. He was out of ammo. "Vance," Judy's voice cut through the phone on the floor, the audio cutting out every second as the darknet node across the street amplified its signal. "The liquidators just deployed a cellular jammer in the back van. I'm losing your telemetry, but the basement ticker just registered a massive secondary spike. Leo's renal assets just hit $280,000. The institutional buyer in Geneva just authorized an additional premium for immediate delivery with 0 cellular degradation. They aren't going to try to sedate him anymore. They're going to take him alive, throw him in the back of the Ford Transit, and let the onboard surgeon do the extraction while they drive toward the state line." "They'll have to pay the toll first, Judy," Mark muttered. Tech log, system status, encrypted corruption, network diagnostic, Elmwood node, cellular signal, terminated, jammer active, anomalous local bandwidth, 10,000 megabytes, ticker overclock, 114 Hz, reality recalibration in progress, asset value Carter L, $740,000 combined net worth. Downstairs, there was no shouting. There was only the heavy, rhythmic thud-thud-thud of tactical boots on the wooden steps, followed by the sharp, mechanical hiss of a fresh respirator filter clicking into place. Clack. A long black steel barrel poked through the gaps in the overturned wardrobe at the top of the stairs. The liquidators weren't trying to clear the obstacle. They were systematic. The tip of a hydraulic spreader, a tool used by firefighters to pop car doors open, was jammed between the oak wardrobe and the plaster wall. With a low mechanical growl, the hydraulic pump engaged. The solid oak frame of the wardrobe began to groan, the thick wood bowing inward, its joints screaming before snapping with a series of loud gunshot-like reports. Mark didn't wait for the wood to clear. He stepped into the doorway of the bedroom, his left hand gripping the 16-inch iron crowbar by the very tip of the shaft, using the full leverage of his remaining good arm. The moment the wardrobe shattered into 3 jagged pieces of raw timber, the first liquidator rolled through the gap, his short-barreled weapon raised. He never got to level the sights. Mark's iron bar came down in a vicious, overhead diagonal chop. The flat hook of the iron didn't hit the man's armored vest. It caught him right in the collarbone, just above the ceramic plate. The impact made a wet, heavy crack like a frozen turkey being hit with a baseball bat. The injured man's left arm instantly went limp, his weapon clattering onto the stained carpet. But these weren't street thugs. They didn't feel pain the same way. The injured man didn't drop. He lunged forward with his right arm, his fingers clawing into the collar of Mark's leather jacket, using his entire body weight to pin Mark against the doorframe. Behind him, the second liquidator, his clear plastic surgical coat completely smeared with the plaster dust from the wall, stepped over his partner's legs, a long silver-plated pneumatic bone saw humming to life in his right hand with a high mechanical shriek.
"Leo," Mark roared, his back slammed against the drywall, the plaster cracking behind his head as the first liquidator choked the air out of his throat with a heavy gloved forearm. "The desk! The metal legs! Throw it!" From beneath the laminate computer desk, something snapped inside Leo Carter. It wasn't bravery, it was the wild animal panic of a steer that can smell the offal from the next room. He didn't lift the desk, he kicked it. The cheap steel-framed desk skidded across the linoleum floor, its sharp edge catching the second liquidator right across the shins just as he stepped into the room with the humming bone saw. The man stumbled, the spinning circular blade chewing into the wooden doorframe with a deafening "ree-cheer," spraying a thick cloud of dry white pine sawdust and old varnish directly into his own respirator mask. Mark seized the half-second fraction of balance. He brought his right knee up into the groin of the man pinning him, then drove the heel of his tactical boot into the guy's ankle until the joint popped. The first liquidator slipped down the wall, his respirator mask leaking a thick, dark froth as he choked on his own blood. Mark stumbled back into the bedroom, his chest heaving, his vision blurring at the edges as the room began to spin. Through the open window, across the wet, rainy expanse of Elmwood Avenue, he could see the cellar windows of number 412. The toxic green light wasn't just pulsing anymore, it was a solid, blinding beam of radioactive emerald that was cutting through the gray sheets of rain, reflecting off the wet siding of Leo's house like a neon sign for an all-night slaughterhouse. Ticker update. Carter, L. Asset value maxed out, $810,000. Liquidation phase, final notice. Additional squad routed from Providence Wharf, ETA 4 minutes. The second liquidator was already back on his feet in the hallway, his respirator mask dripping with white sawdust, his hand reaching down to unholster a secondary sidearm. Behind him, through the broken window of the stairwell, Mark could hear the low, distinct diesel rumble of 2 more black transit vans pulling up to the curb outside. "Mark," Leo whispered, his voice completely hollow as he looked at the blood on the doorframe. They're going to kill me for things I haven't even used yet." Mark Vance looked at his phone, then at the kid, his face hardening into that terrifying, cynical actuary expression that meant someone was about to lose their deductible. "They aren't going to kill you for your assets, Leo," Mark said, his left hand reaching into his pocket to pull out a small amber gloss vial of commercial-grade warehouse pesticide he'd stolen from the Malibu's trunk 3 weeks ago. "They're going to kill you because your stock is too high, so we're going to stage a market crash." Chapter 4, Short Squeeze. "What is that?" Leo stammered, his eyes darting from the amber glass vial in Mark's hand to the door where the rhythmic, heavy footsteps of the second liquidator were already rattling the loose floorboards of the hallway. "This is 40 milligrams of concentrated organophosphate insecticide," Mark said, his left hand using a small pocket knife to pop the plastic seal off the vial. Apex Logistics uses it to clear rat infestations in the deep freeze bays in New Jersey. If you drink the whole bottle, your nervous system liquefies in 90 seconds and your liver turns into a gray paste. If you take 3 drops, your heart rate plummets, your kidneys go into acute chemical shock, and your blood chemistry mimics a terminal toxic overdose. You want me to poison myself? "I want you to devalue the inventory, Leo," Mark said. He didn't wait for the kid's consent. Mark lunged forward, his left arm pinning Leo's head against the wall while his thumb forced the kid's jaw open. With a cold, clinical precision, Mark tilted the amber vial, letting exactly 3 thick, yellow, oily drops fall onto the back of Leo's tongue. "Swallow," Mark growled. Leo gagged, his face instantly twisting into a mask of pure, visceral revulsion as the chemical hit his system. He swallowed convulsively, his eyes rolling back as his throat tightened. Within 4 seconds, the reaction was physical. Leo tumbled off the bed onto the floor, his limbs twitching in a series of violent, irregular spasms. A thin white froth began to bubble at the corners of his mouth, and his skin turned a dull, sick shade of mottled ash gray. Tech log, real-time value collapse. Critical alert, asset deprecation. Target, Carter, L. Toxic contamination detected. Hepatic viability, dropping from 98% to 14%, acute necrosis. Renal filtration, failure in progress. Market effect, contract viability collapsed. Buy order rejected by escrow. The bedroom door didn't open, it was blown off its frame. The second liquidator stepped into the room, his silver-plated bone saw raised, the circular blade still humming with that high, ear-splitting shriek. But as he stepped over the threshold, his black respirator mask jerked downward, his eyes locking onto Leo's twitching, frothing body on the linoleum floor. The liquidator froze. He didn't raise his weapon, he didn't move toward the asset. He slowly raised his left wrist, looking at a small military-grade digital monitor strapped to his forearm. On the screen, a red line was dropping vertically like a stone off a cliff. Across the street, inside the old machinist's basement, the toxic green light emitted a loud electrical pop that sounded like a transformer blowing out on a telephone pole. The blinding emerald beam that had been slicing through the rain instantly dissolved, shrinking back down into a dull, muddy olive-green flicker inside the concrete substrate. The Liquidity Group, Audit Report, Reevaluation, Carter, L., age 24, Total Asset Profile. Previous value, $810,000. Current value, $1.42. Reason, total chemical contamination, unmarketable meat. Status, transaction canceled. Margin, void. The liquidator in the doorway let out a long mechanical hiss through his respirator. He didn't look at Mark Vance. He didn't look at the blood on the walls. He lowered the bone saw, flipped a toggle switch on the handle to kill the power to the circular blade, and let the heavy tool drop to his side on its tactical sling. "The asset is spoiled," a flat, computerized voice synthetic rebounded from the speaker inside his respirator mask. "Liquidation is no longer cost-effective. Total loss registered." The man turned on his heel. He didn't run. He walked with a measured, professional stride back into the hallway, stepped over the broken timber of the oak wardrobe, and headed down the stairs. From the window, Mark watched the front yard. The 2 black Ford Transit vans that had just pulled up to the curb didn't even park. The side doors didn't pop. The moment the data synced to their local network, the drivers threw the vehicles into reverse, their tires screaming on the wet asphalt as they backed out of Elmwood Avenue without their lights on. The 2 injured liquidators downstairs were dragged out by their arms, their plastic surgical slickers smearing a long, dark streak of red and plaster dust across the ruined front porch. Within 60 seconds, the street was completely empty, save for the heavy summer rain and the rusted 2018 Chevy Malibu sitting quietly under the amber glow of the street lamp. "Mark!" Pendelton's voice cracked through the phone, small and trembling. They're leaving. They just got back in the vans and drove away. Why didn't they kill him?" "Because ammunition costs 40 cents a round," Mark Vance wheezed, his left hand leaning heavily against the window frame as he watched the taillights vanish into the Cranston dark. He turned back to the floor, where Leo Carter was still shivering violently, his hands clawing at the carpet as his body tried to reject the microdose of New Jersey rot poison. Mark walked over, reached into his leather jacket, and pulled out a small pre-filled plastic syringe of industrial atropine, the standard Apex-issued antidote to chemical spills.
Hold still, Leo, Mark said, driving the needle straight through the kid's sweatpants into his thigh. The market just filed for bankruptcy, but you still have to pay the restocking fee. Chapter 5. Bankruptcy. The atropine hit Leo Carter's femoral artery like a gallon of liquid ice. His spine buckled off the floorboards in one final violent tremor, his heels drumming a frantic tattoo against the stained linoleum before his diaphragm violently unknotted. He rolled onto his side, dry heaving a bitter yellow bile onto the carpet, his chest gasping for oxygen as the chemical paralysis retreated from his lungs. The gray, ash-like pallor of his skin slowly gave way to a flushed, broken capillary red. Breathing is stabilized, Mark Vance muttered, pulling the empty plastic syringe out of the kid's thigh and tossing it into the broken drywall. He didn't offer a hand to help the kid up. He simply leaned against the window frame, his left hand holding his iron crowbar while his burnt right arm throbbed a steady, sickening rhythm beneath the yellowed gauze. From the hallway, the stairs groaned. Arthur Pendelton appeared in the doorway, his gray suit soaked through with mud and rain, his single remaining CVS foam slipper completely gone now. His bare left foot was black with street grime, and he was holding the empty .38 revolver by the barrel as if it were a dead bird. His silver-rimmed spectacles were crooked, smeared with a mixture of grease and Rhode Island rainwater. "Arthur," Pendleton whispered, his voice trembling so hard his teeth clicked. I fired twice. I think I hit a structural beam. Is the transaction canceled?" "The contract dissolved, Arthur," Mark said, tapping his phone screen with his knuckle. "The system checked the inventory, found it compromised by industrial toxins, and filed for immediate asset abandonment. In the corporate world, they call it a write-off. Risk Management Outcome Memorandum. Field Audit Case 1004. Summary. Liquidation value rejected. 0 contract compliance. Operational casualties, 0 Apex personnel / 2 collateral brokers, non-compensable. Retained asset status, retrofitted with high toxicity profile, alive. Net balancing, claims prevented, $740,000 exposure mitigated." Leo sat up, wiping the white foam from his chin with the sleeve of his oversized hoodie. He was shivering violently, his eyes wide and vacant as he stared at the bloody smear on the doorframe where the liquidator's collarbone had snapped. They just left me," Leo croaked, his voice raw from the chemical purge, "because I wasn't worth anything anymore?" "They left you because your overhead exceeded your yield," Mark said, walking over and looking down at the kid with total indifference. "If they spent the gas and manpower to haul your poisoned liver to a clinic, the refrigeration costs alone would have put their quarterly ledger in the red. You didn't survive because of a miracle, Leo. You survived because you became a bad investment." Mark reached down, grabbed his smartphone from the floorboards and slid it into his leather jacket. Across Elmwood Avenue, the old machinist's house had gone completely dark again. The emerald green glare had been replaced by the standard miserable gray twilight of an early morning New England storm. The entity using the concrete substrate hadn't been destroyed, it had simply closed the Providence brokerage desk and routed its capital to a more stable market. "Come on, Arthur," Mark said, stepping over the shattered pieces of the oak wardrobe. "We need to clear the driveway before the local police arrive to file a useless property damage report. Our authorization code doesn't cover municipal weapons discharges." Epilogue, non-refundable. The heater in the 2018 Chevrolet Malibu worked like an old dog. A lot of noise, a lot of smell, but very little actual warmth. The car sat at the edge of the Providence wharf, the front tires resting against a rotting timber bulkhead. Outside, the Atlantic Ocean was a flat, sleek gray sheet of iron under the morning fog, the rain finally tapering off into a heavy, salt-tinged mist that coated the windshield in a greasy film. Screech, flop, screech, flop. Arthur Pendleton sat in the passenger seat with his knees pulled up to his chest, his bare, black-stained foot wrapped in a clean microfiber cloth Mark had found in the spare tire well. He was furiously scratching lines of legal cursive into his yellow pad with a leaking ballpoint pen. "I'm logging the pesticide use as an unapproved chemical intervention under Section 4B, Pendleton muttered, his voice hollow. "But Arthur, what happens to the old man across the street, the machinist? The ticker is still in his floor." The ticker stayed dormant until the next high-frequency buy order enters the zip code, Mark Vance said, leaning back against the headrest. He had stripped off his ruined leather sleeve, exposing the raw, blistering white bands of the electrical burns on his forearm. He was painting them with a fresh layer of brown iodine, his face completely motionless despite the chemical sting. The dashboard speaker emitted a sharp, treble-heavy chime. Judy Lynn's typing was slower now, the clatter of her keys accompanied by the distinct sound of a coffee mug clinking against her desk in sub-basement 4. Vance, Pendelton, Judy said. The regional risk pool just finalized the data entry for the Elmwood node. Leo Carter's account has been successfully flagged with a lifetime premium surcharge for chemical toxicity and volatile biological listing. The syndicate won't be looking at his lungs again for at least 30 years. Did we bill him for the atropine, Judy? Mark asked, copying the iodine bottle with his teeth and tightening it with his left hand. Invoice number 994A has already been delivered to his digital banking app. He has 14 business days to clear the balance before Apex initiates a secondary property lien. Apex Risk Assurance. Invoice generated. Account number RE415-Carter. Service, unapproved biological preservation. Fees accrued, $640. Notice, unpaid balances will result in automatic asset reevaluation. Pendleton stopped writing. He looked out through the salt-crusted side window at the gray cargo ships sitting low in the harbor, their cranes looking like giant skeletal fingers reaching into the mist. "We didn't fix anything, did we?" the lawyer whispered. We adjusted the numbers until the killers went home." "That's what insurance is, Arthur," Mark Vance said, shifting the Malibu into reverse. The transmission caught with a heavy, ungreased thunk that vibrated through the floorboards. He turned the car around, the tires crunching through the wet gravel of the wharf as they headed back towards the state line, leaving the salt, the fog, and the meat market behind them in the dark.
Case 1004 finalized. Asset successfully devalued. The liquidation team went home empty-handed. But here's an urgent audit check for the rest of you. If your smartwatch suddenly alerts you that your left kidney's market value just hit $250,000, what's your next move? Do you barricade your front door, or do you take a sip of something toxic to deliberately tank your stock? Let us know your risk mitigation strategy in the comments below. Mark Vance is checking the ledger tonight. If your heart rate survived this market crash, hit that like button and subscribe to Subbasement 4. Our next case in Rhode Island is already waiting. Good night.